My son hit me for asking his wife not to fart at the dinner table. The sound of his palm striking my face echoed louder than any words ever could. I never imagined my own child would raise his hand to me. But there I stood, trembling in my own kitchen, my cheek burning with shame and disbelief. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. Before we begin, I'd be truly grateful if you'd take a moment to like this video and consider subscribing to the channel. It helps me keep sharing these stories with those who need them most. My name is Margaret, and I live in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, New York. The wallpaper is faded yellow, peeling slightly at the corners where time has worn it thin. Every morning, I wake to the rumble of the 7 train passing nearby, shaking the picture frames on my dresser. The photographs inside those frames tell the story of a life devoted entirely to someone who no longer sees me as anything more than an inconvenience. My son David is 42 now, married to a woman named Brianna who looks at me as though I am a stain on her perfectly curated life. The apartment holds so many memories. The worn spot on the couch where David used to curl up with his homework. The kitchen table where we ate breakfast together every morning before school, where I would quiz him on spelling words while scrambling eggs. The small bedroom that used to be his, now converted into a sewing room I rarely use, still painted the same blue he chose when he was 12. Every corner of this place whispers of the boy he was, making the man he's become even harder to accept. That Sunday afternoon in late October, I had spent hours preparing lunch. The smell of pot roast filled my small kitchen, mingling with the scent of freshly baked rolls. I set the table with my good china, the set I received as a wedding gift decades ago, back when my husband was still alive and our future seemed bright with promise. I wanted everything to be perfect because I rarely saw David anymore. And when I did, the visits felt rushed, obligatory, like items being checked off a to-do list. I had hoped this meal might bring us closer, might remind him of the Sundays we used to share when he was young, when he would help me in the kitchen and tell me about his dreams. I remember standing at my kitchen window that morning, watching the October light filter through the buildings across the street, turning everything golden. I had been up since 5, unable to sleep from the nervous excitement of seeing my son. I had already cleaned the apartment twice, rearranged the flowers on the table 3 times, and checked the roast temperature every 15 minutes. Each small preparation was an act of love, a desperate attempt to create the perfect environment that might somehow crack through the wall that had grown between us. They arrived 30 minutes late. Brianna walked in first, her designer handbag swinging from her arm, her high heels clicking against my worn linoleum floor. She barely acknowledged me, moving past with a vague nod before settling onto my couch and immediately pulling out her phone. David followed, kissing my cheek quickly, distractedly, already reaching for his own device. I tried to ignore the sting of their indifference and ushered them to the table, serving the food I had prepared with so much care. As I served the pot roast, I found myself narrating the process, filling the silence with nervous chatter. "I used your grandmother's recipe," I said to David, spooning gravy over his portion. "Remember how you used to love this when you were little? You'd always ask for seconds, sometimes thirds." He nodded without looking up from his phone, and I felt my smile falter. Brianna didn't even acknowledge the food being placed in front of her, her thumbs flying across her screen, a small smirk playing at her lips as she read whatever was holding her attention. During the meal, Brianna did something that shocked me. As I was speaking about my week, describing my visit to the community garden where I had started volunteering, she interrupted me with a loud, unrestrained belch, followed immediately by an equally audible release of gas. She didn't excuse herself. She didn't even pause. She simply continued scrolling through her phone as though nothing had happened. I felt my face flush with embarrassment, though we were alone in my apartment. It wasn't about propriety or old-fashioned manners. It was about basic respect, about acknowledging that we share space with others, that our actions affect those around us. The sound seemed to hang in the air, and I watched David's face for some reaction, some acknowledgement of what had just happened. But he simply continued eating, his eyes still on his screen, as though his wife's behavior was perfectly normal. I felt something shift inside me in that moment, a small crack in the foundation of my endless accommodation. This wasn't just about manners, it was about being seen, being valued, being treated as though my presence mattered. I waited a moment, choosing my words carefully. My voice was gentle, almost apologetic. I said, "Brianna, dear, perhaps you could excuse yourself if you need to do that. It's just that we're at the table, and I'd appreciate it if we could keep things pleasant during our meal." The room went silent. Brianna's eyes lifted from her phone, narrowing as they fixed on me. David's fork stopped midway to his mouth. The air became thick with tension I hadn't anticipated. Before I could say anything else, David slammed his hand on the table, making the china rattle. "Are you serious right now, Mom?" His voice was sharp, cutting. "You're going to criticize my wife over something so ridiculous?" The anger in his voice shocked me. I had expected perhaps mild annoyance, maybe even him brushing off my comment with a joke. But this intensity, this immediate escalation to fury, caught me completely off guard. My hands trembled as I set down my own fork, the metal clattering against the china. I stammered, trying to explain that I meant no offense, that I was simply asking for a small courtesy. But David stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is exactly why we don't come here more often," he said, his words like daggers. "You're always finding something to complain about, always making Brianna feel unwelcome." "David, please," I heard myself say, my voice small and pleading. "I didn't mean to upset anyone. I just thought—" "You just thought what? That you could control how people behave in your presence? That everyone needs to follow your outdated rules?" His face was flushed now, a vein pulsing in his temple. I had seen him angry before, but never at me, never like this. Brianna sat back with a satisfied smirk, saying nothing, letting David fight her battle. I felt tears pricking at my eyes, confusion flooding my mind. How had a simple request turned into this? I reached out to touch David's arm, to calm him down, to somehow salvage what was left of our afternoon. That's when it happened. He swung around and his hand connected with my face. The slap wasn't hard enough to knock me down, but it was forceful enough to send a shockwave through my entire body. The physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional devastation that followed. Time seemed to slow down in that moment. I felt the sting on my cheek, hot and sharp. I heard the sound of the impact, a crack that seemed impossibly loud in my small kitchen. I saw the shock register on David's own face for just a second before it hardened into defensive anger. And I saw Brianna's expression, something that looked almost like triumph, as though she had won a game I didn't know we were playing. What David didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that I had set up my laptop on the sideboard, recording our gathering. I had started this habit months ago, creating video diaries to combat the loneliness that had become my constant companion. I would record myself cooking, talking about my day, sharing memories of when David was young. Sometimes I watched these videos late at night when the silence became too heavy. The camera had been running since before they arrived, capturing everything, including that terrible moment when my son's hand struck my face. I raised David alone after his father died when he was just 7 years old. Richard had been a construction worker, a good man with calloused hands and a warm laugh. He died in an accident on a job site, leaving me with a mountain of medical debt and a child who needed everything. I worked double shifts at the hospital where I was a nurse's aide, coming home exhausted only to help David with his homework, pack his lunch for the next day, and tuck him into bed with stories I made up because I was too tired to read. I remember those years in fragments, moments of exhaustion so complete I sometimes wondered if I would survive them. There were nights when I would fall asleep at the kitchen table while helping David with his math homework, jolting awake to find him gently shaking my shoulder, telling me to go to bed. There were mornings when I would get dressed in the dark, moving through the apartment like a ghost, trying not to wake him, leaving for my early shift before dawn. There were parent-teacher conferences where I would arrive still in my scrubs, smelling of hospital antiseptic, sitting in those tiny chairs, feeling the weight of being both mother and father, provider and nurturer, everything to this small person who needed so much. Every sacrifice I made was for him. When he wanted to join the baseball team in middle school, I picked up weekend shifts to pay for his equipment and uniforms. When he got accepted to college, I took out loans I'm still paying off at 71 years old because I wanted him to have opportunities I never had. I worked through holidays so he could have gifts under the tree. Elaborate birthday parties with all his friends, summer camps while other kids in our neighborhood stayed home. I gave up dating, gave up any chance of remarrying, because I didn't want him to feel replaced or confused. My entire adult life revolved around ensuring his happiness and success. There was a man once, Gerald, who worked in maintenance at the hospital. He was kind, patient, would wait for me after my shift with coffee and a smile. He asked me out for months before I finally said yes. And for a brief time, I allowed myself to imagine a different future. But David was 13 then, struggling with his father's death in ways he couldn't articulate, acting out at school, withdrawn at home. When I tried to introduce Gerald, David's hostility was immediate and absolute. He refused to speak to me for a week, and the guilt crushed me. I ended things with Gerald after just 2 months, choosing my son's emotional stability over my own chance at companionship. Gerald understood, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes when I told him, "You're a good mother, Margaret," he said. "I hope David knows how lucky he is." I often wonder now if that was the moment I taught David that my needs would always come second, that his feelings would always trump mine, that I would always sacrifice myself on the altar of his comfort. And for years, it seemed to work. David was a good student, a kind boy who would help elderly neighbors carry their groceries and shovel snow from their sidewalks in winter. He graduated with honors, got a good job in finance, started making real money investing in stocks and building what he called his portfolio. He even dabbled in cryptocurrency, buying Bitcoin when it was still relatively new, turning a modest investment into substantial wealth. By the time he was 35, David had accumulated a small fortune, enough to buy a beautiful brownstone in Brooklyn and drive a car that cost more than I had made in 5 years of nursing work. But somewhere along the way, the son I raised disappeared. The change began when he met Brianna at a corporate event in Manhattan. She came from old money, her family's wealth stretching back generations, with assets in real estate, gold investments, and international business ventures. To her, my modest apartment and simple lifestyle were embarrassing, evidence of a lower class she had never associated with. She made it clear from their first visit together that she found me lacking. She would wrinkle her nose at my furniture, make comments about the neighborhood, suggest I should move somewhere safer without offering any actual help to make that possible. I remember the first time David brought her to meet me. I had cleaned for days, bought flowers, prepared his favorite meal. Brianna walked in wearing an outfit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her eyes sweeping over my apartment with barely concealed disdain. She touched nothing, as though afraid my modest belongings might contaminate her. When I served dinner, she picked at her food, moving it around her plate more than eating it. "It's very rustic," she said, and David laughed nervously, trying to bridge the gap between his two worlds. After they left, I sat on my couch and cried, knowing instinctively that this woman would take my son from me, that she represented a life I could never be part of, a standard I could never meet. David, so eager to fit into her world, began to echo her attitudes. He stopped calling as often. His visits became rare, usually only when he needed something. Sometimes it was advice about managing his growing investment portfolio. Other times it was access to my nursing connections when Brianna needed a doctor's appointment expedited. Once, he asked me to babysit their dog while they vacationed in Europe for 3 weeks. But when I requested they visit me for Thanksgiving, he said they had other commitments. I forgave every slight, every missed call, every forgotten Mother's Day. I told myself he was busy, that adult children have their own lives, that I should be grateful for whatever time he could spare. But deep down, in the quiet moments when I sat alone in my apartment listening to the traffic outside, I began to wonder if my unconditional love had taught him that I would always be available, always accommodating, always willing to accept whatever scraps of attention he threw my way. The signs of exploitation were everywhere once I started looking. David would call when his stock investments needed diversification advice, knowing I had a friend from the hospital whose husband was a financial advisor. He would ask me to wire him money from my modest savings account when cash flow was tight between his dividend payments, always promising to pay me back, but never following through. When Brianna wanted to renovate their kitchen, they asked if I could lend them $15,000, money I had been saving for years in case of medical emergencies. I gave it to them, and they installed marble countertops and custom cabinets that cost 3 times what they borrowed. I never saw a penny of repayment. When they asked for that money, I remember the phone call clearly. David's voice was casual, almost cheerful. "Hey, Mom, quick question. Brianna and I are doing some work on the house and we're a bit short on liquid cash right now. Everything's tied up in investments. You know how it is. Could you spot us $15,000? Just for a few months until some of our stocks mature." I had sat there holding the phone, looking at my bank statement on the computer screen, seeing my entire safety net represented in that number. My heart said no, my mind said no, but my mouth said, "Of course, honey. When do you need it?" Because that's what I always did. That's who I had always been. The mother who gave and gave and gave until there was nothing left. There were smaller indignities, too. Birthday cards that arrived weeks late, if at all. Phone calls that lasted less than 5 minutes before David said he had to go. The time I fell in the shower and bruised my ribs badly, calling David from the emergency room, only to be told he couldn't come because they had theater tickets. I took a taxi home alone that night, climbed the stairs to my apartment clutching my injured side, and cried myself to sleep wondering when I had become so disposable to the person I loved most in the world. The afternoon of the slap, after they left my apartment in a storm of anger and accusations, I sat in my kitchen staring at the uneaten pot roast. The good china was still on the table, gravy congealing on the serving platter. I felt hollowed out, as though everything inside me had been scooped away, leaving only a shell. My cheek still stung where David had hit me, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional devastation. I made myself a cup of tea with trembling hands, the ceramic mug nearly slipping from my grasp. As I sat at the table alone, I noticed the laptop still recording on the sideboard. I walked over and stopped the video, then sat down to watch what had been captured. Seeing the moment of impact from an outside perspective made it somehow worse. I watched myself flinch, watched the confusion and hurt flood my face, watched David's anger twist his features into something I didn't recognize. Brianna in the background looked almost pleased, as though she had won some unspoken competition. Watching that video, I saw myself with new eyes. The woman on the screen looked small, diminished, apologetic even in the moment of being struck. The way I had reached out to David afterward, still trying to comfort him, still trying to make peace, even after he had hit me. The way I had stammered and apologized, as though I was the one who had done something wrong. The realization washed over me like cold water. This was what I had become. A woman so accustomed to accepting poor treatment that even physical violence didn't trigger appropriate outrage. My first instinct had been to soothe him, to make him feel better, to take responsibility for his actions. I saved the video file, though I didn't know yet what I would do with it. Then I did something I had never done before. I closed my laptop, put away the china, scraped the uneaten food into containers, and instead of calling David to apologize or try to make peace, I did nothing. I let the silence sit. I let the hurt exist without trying to fix it, without rushing to smooth things over, without taking responsibility for his actions. That night, I lay in bed unable to sleep, replaying not just the afternoon's events, but years of accumulated small cruelties. The forgotten birthdays. The times I was sick and heard nothing from him. The expensive gifts he bought Brianna while I received drugstore chocolates on Christmas. The way he spoke to me like I was a burden, an obligation, something to be managed rather than someone to be loved. I thought about the times I had bitten my tongue when Brianna made cutting remarks about my apartment, my clothes, my job, my life. I thought about the money I had given them over the years, money I couldn't afford to spare, money that went toward their luxury while I clipped coupons and bought generic brands at the grocery store. I thought about all the times I had shown up for David's important moments while he couldn't be bothered to attend mine. There was the time he graduated from business school, and I took a day off work I couldn't afford to lose, traveled to Boston on a Greyhound bus because I couldn't afford the train, sat in that auditorium bursting with pride as he walked across the stage. And then, 3 years later, when I finally finished the associate's degree, I had been working on for 7 years, taking night classes between shifts. He didn't come to my graduation. He had a work dinner, he said, an important client. I sat in that auditorium, surrounded by families celebrating, and the seat I had saved for him remained empty. I told myself it was fine, that his career was important, that I understood. But I had cried all the way home on the subway, trying to hide my tears behind my program, feeling foolish for expecting more. Somewhere around 3 a.m, as the city hummed outside my window and the weight of loneliness pressed down on my chest, I made a decision. I couldn't continue like this. Something had to change, even if that something was me, even if it meant risking the only family connection I had left. The next morning, I woke with a strange sense of clarity. I went about my routine differently. Instead of immediately checking my phone to see if David had called to apologize, I left it in another room. Instead of replaying the fight and wondering what I could have done differently, I went for a walk in the neighborhood park. The October air was crisp, leaves crunching under my feet, and for the first time in months, I felt something other than anxiety and sadness. I felt the faint stirring of anger, and surprisingly, it felt like power. I stopped at my local library and checked out books on setting boundaries, on recognizing emotional abuse, on reclaiming your life after giving too much of yourself away. I read them cover to cover over the next few days, highlighting passages that resonated, making notes in the margins. One sentence stuck with me. Teaching people how to treat you isn't selfish, it's necessary. The librarian, a woman named Rosa, who I had seen countless times but never really talked to, noticed me checking out the books. Heavy reading, she said kindly, scanning the titles. Are you okay? I was surprised by the question, by the genuine concern in her voice. I'm working on it, I told her, and she nodded with understanding. These are good books, she said. I read that one. She pointed to one about emotional boundaries. After my divorce, changed my life. Sometimes we need permission to put ourselves first. She handed me my books and a tissue, because tears had started streaming down my face without my realizing it. The library has a support group on Tuesday evenings, she said softly. Women helping women. You'd be welcome any time. I thanked her, not sure if I would go, but grateful for the kindness of a stranger who saw my pain and acknowledged it. I did end up going to that Tuesday support group. Walking into the basement room of the library, seeing a circle of folding chairs occupied by women of all ages, I almost turned around and left. But Rosa was there, and she smiled at me, gesturing to an empty chair. The facilitator, a woman named Dr. Chen who volunteered her time, explained that this was a safe space to share our experiences with difficult relationships. No judgment here, she said. Only understanding and support. I listened that first night as other women told their stories. A young woman in her 20s talked about her narcissistic mother who constantly criticized her appearance and life choices. A woman around my age described her adult daughter who only called when she needed money, who blamed her mother for every problem in her life. Another woman, tears streaming down her face, shared how her son had stolen from her repeatedly, how she had enabled his addiction for years by bailing him out, how she was finally learning to say no even though it terrified her. Each story resonated with something in my own experience. The patterns were so similar, the endless giving, the hope that one more sacrifice would finally earn the love and respect we craved, the crushing realization that we were being used, the guilt that came with setting boundaries. When it was my turn to speak, I found myself sharing the whole story. About David, about the slap, about years of feeling invisible. The women listened without interruption, and when I finished, several were crying along with me. "You didn't deserve that," Dr. Chen said firmly. "No matter what happened, no matter what you said or did, you didn't deserve to be hit, and you have every right to protect yourself now." Those words, spoken with such authority and compassion, cracked something open inside me. I sobbed in that basement room, surrounded by women I barely knew, and felt more supported than I had in years with the son I had raised. 3 days after the incident, David finally called. I let it ring twice before answering, something I never would have done before. His voice was casual, as though nothing significant had happened. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. How are you?" There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what he had done, just pleasant small talk, as though our last interaction hadn't ended with his hand striking my face. I felt my throat tighten with the urge to let it go, to pretend everything was fine, to preserve the peace at any cost. But then I remembered the video, remembered the look on his face, remembered years of accepting unacceptable behavior. "I'm not well, David," I said quietly. "I'm hurt. By what happened Sunday. By how you treated me. By the fact that you hit me and you haven't even mentioned it." There was a pause. Then, unbelievably, he laughed. Not a full laugh, but a dismissive snort. "Come on, Mom. Don't be dramatic. I barely touched you. You're making a big deal out of nothing." The words hit me like another slap. Making a big deal out of nothing. How many times in my life had someone told me I was overreacting, being too sensitive, expecting too much? How many times had I internalized those messages and diminished my own pain to make others comfortable? "It's not nothing to me," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "You put your hands on me in anger. That's not nothing." "Jesus, Mom, I didn't hit you. I gestured and you were in the way. You're twisting this into something it wasn't. Gaslighting. The book I had read used that term. Making someone doubt their own perception of reality, their own memory, their own experience. I had the video. I knew what happened. But even armed with evidence, I felt the old instinct to doubt myself, to accept his version of events because it was easier than conflict. "I know what happened, David, and so do you." "Whatever. Look. I called because Brianna and I are having some people over next month for Thanksgiving, and we thought you might want to come. But if you're going to be like this, maybe it's better if you don't." The invitation was delivered like a threat, a test of my willingness to comply. "Come, but only if you'll behave. Come, but only if you'll accept being treated poorly and stay silent about it. Come, but only if you'll be grateful for scraps." Every instinct screamed at me to accept, to apologize for causing tension, to be grateful I was being included at all. But something had shifted in me during those sleepless nights. Something had broken and reformed into something harder, less willing to bend. "I don't think I'll be coming to Thanksgiving this year," I heard myself say. "I need some space, David. I need time to think about our relationship and what I'm willing to accept." The silence on the other end was deafening. Then his voice turned cold. "Fine. Do whatever you want. Don't expect us to keep reaching out if you're going to push us away." The call ended. I sat holding the phone, my heart pounding, adrenaline coursing through me. I had just done something I never thought I would do. I had said no. I had set a boundary. And the sky hadn't fallen. I was still breathing. The world continued turning. But the fear came rushing in moments later. What if he never spoke to me again? What if I had just severed the only family connection I had? What if I died alone and wasn't found for days because I had pushed away the one person who might notice my absence? The terror of loneliness nearly made me pick up the phone and call him back, apologize, take it all back. Instead, I made myself another cup of tea. I sat at my kitchen table and looked around my small apartment. The faded wallpaper, the worn furniture, the quiet space that had witnessed so much of my solitary life, and I realized something. I was already lonely. I had been lonely for years, surrounded by people who didn't really see me, who took from me without giving back, who made me feel small and insignificant. What was I really losing if David cut me off? A relationship that already caused me more pain than joy? Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. David called twice, both times needing something. Once to ask if I could help him get priority scheduling for Brianna's dermatology appointment through my hospital connections. Another time to request I loan them money for a new investment opportunity he was excited about, something involving cryptocurrency that he swore would triple their money in months. Both times, I said no. Both times he was shocked, then angry, then dismissive. The first time I said no felt like jumping off a cliff. My heart raced, my palms sweated, and I had to grip the phone tightly to keep my hand from shaking. "I'm sorry, David, but I can't help with that right now," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The silence that followed was deafening. Then came his response, dripping with disbelief and indignation. "You can't, or you won't." The distinction felt important to him, as though one was acceptable and the other was a betrayal. "Both," I found myself saying, surprised by my own honesty. "I can't, because I have limited resources and limited energy, and I won't because I need to prioritize my own needs for once." The words felt foreign in my mouth, like speaking a language I had never learned but somehow understood. "I don't understand what's gotten into you," he said during the second call. "Since when are you so selfish?" Selfish? There was that word, wielded like a weapon against anyone who dared prioritize their own well-being. I had been called selfish my entire life for the smallest acts of self-preservation. Wanting a day off was selfish. Asking for help was selfish. Having needs was selfish. But giving until I had nothing left, that was virtuous. That was what good mothers, good women, good people did. "I'm not being selfish, David. I'm being realistic about what I can give. I'm on a fixed income. I can't keep lending you money I can't afford to lose. You know I'm good for it. My portfolio is strong. I'll pay you back." "You said that last time, and the time before that. I'm still waiting." He sputtered, caught off guard by my directness. "I can't believe you're keeping track like some kind of accountant. That's really petty, Mom." Petty. Another word designed to make me shrink. "I'm not keeping track to punish you. I'm keeping track because I need to know where my money goes." That's called being responsible. The conversation ended badly, as they all did now, but each time I held my ground, each time I refused to cave to his demands or manipulations, I felt a little stronger. The guilt was still there, gnawing at me during quiet moments, but it was competing now with something else. Self-respect, dignity, the radical idea that I mattered. My neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, noticed the change in me. She was a widow about my age who lived 2 doors down, a woman I had exchanged pleasantries with for years but never really connected with. One afternoon in early November, she knocked on my door holding a plate of cookies. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "But I noticed you've seemed a bit down lately, and I thought some homemade snickerdoodles might help." I invited her in, and over tea and cookies, I found myself telling her everything. About David, about the slap, about years of feeling used and unappreciated. She listened without judgment, without offering the empty platitudes I had heard from others. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You're not alone," she said simply, "and you deserve better than how he's treating you." Those words, spoken with such conviction, made me cry. Not sad tears, but something else. Relief, maybe. Validation. The profound comfort of being seen and understood by another person. Mrs. Johnson became a regular visitor after that. We would have tea together, share meals, watch old movies. She filled some of the loneliness that David's absence had created. But more importantly, she showed me what genuine care looked like. She showed up. She listened. She gave without expecting anything in return except my company. Mrs. Johnson also shared her own story over those weeks of friendship. Her late husband had been controlling. She told me one rainy afternoon as we sat by my window watching the city below. "Not physically abusive," she said, "but he made all the decisions. Where we lived, how we spent money, who we saw. I thought that was just how marriage worked. That I was supposed to be accommodating, flexible, selfless." She paused, stirring her tea slowly. It wasn't until after he died that I realized how small I had made myself to fit into his vision of what a wife should be. And the strange thing was, once he was gone, and I started making my own choices, I discovered I liked myself better. I was more interesting than I'd ever allowed myself to be. Her words resonated deeply, and I realized that I too had spent decades making myself smaller, quieter, more accommodating, hoping that if I just took up less space, if I just needed less, if I just gave more, I would be worthy of love. As November turned colder, I made a decision that terrified me. I had been thinking about it for weeks, turning it over in my mind, trying to find the courage. One morning, I woke up and knew it was time. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, couldn't keep accepting crumbs of affection while pretending it was enough. I needed to confront what had happened, needed to make David see what he had done, needed to demand change or accept that our relationship might not survive. I called David and asked him to come over for a conversation. Just him, I specified, not Brianna. He agreed reluctantly, his tone suggesting he was humoring me, that he expected this to be another instance of me overreacting to nothing. We set a date for the following Sunday, exactly 1 month after the incident that had changed everything. I spent the week preparing, not food this time, but mentally. I practiced what I wanted to say, wrote it all down in a journal, refined my words until they felt true and clear. I decided I would show him the video. He needed to see himself, needed to confront the reality of what he had done. Part of me hoped that seeing it would shock him into awareness, would wake up the son I used to know. Part of me knew it might do nothing at all. Sunday arrived cold and gray, the sky heavy with the threat of snow. David showed up on time, which surprised me. He looked tired, thinner than I remembered, dark circles under his eyes. For a moment, my maternal instinct kicked in, wanting to ask if he was okay, if he was eating enough, if work was stressing him out. But I pushed the impulse down. This wasn't about taking care of him. This was about taking care of me. We sat in my living room, the space awkward with tension. I had set up my laptop on the coffee table, the video file ready to play. David's eyes flicked to it, then back to me. "What's this about, Mom? I don't have a lot of time." Even now, even coming to what he surely knew would be a difficult conversation, he was setting limits on how much of himself he would give me. Part of me wanted to call him out on it, to point out that I had given him unlimited time my entire life, but I stayed focused on my purpose. "It's about what happened last month, about you hitting me." He rolled his eyes, actually rolled his eyes, like I was a child making up stories. I already told you that's not what happened. You're exaggerating. Without saying anything else, I pressed play on the video. The footage started before they arrived, showing me in the kitchen, my face animated as I prepared the meal, clearly excited about their visit. Then they came in, Brianna's dismissive entrance, David's distracted kiss, the meal, my gentle request, the escalation. And then, clear as day, David's hand striking my face, the sound of it, my shocked expression, Brianna's satisfied smirk in the background. I watched David as he watched the video. His face went pale, his jaw clenched. When it ended, he sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the blank screen. I waited, giving him space to process, to respond, to maybe, finally, apologize. Where did you get this? His voice was tight, controlled. I record myself sometimes. For my video diary. The camera was on. I didn't plan to capture this, but I did. So, you're spying on us now? Recording private family moments without permission. The deflection was immediate, instinctive. Rather than address what he had done, he was making me the villain for having evidence of it. This isn't about the recording, David. This is about you putting your hands on me, about you hitting your mother. I didn't hit you. It was barely a tap. You're blowing this completely out of proportion. I felt my anger rising, hot and unfamiliar in my chest. I watched the same video you just watched. That wasn't a tap. That was a slap. You struck me in anger because I asked your wife to be respectful at my table. She wasn't being disrespectful. She's comfortable here. You're the one who made it weird by criticizing her like some kind of etiquette police. I asked for basic courtesy, David. That's not unreasonable. You know what? I'm done with this. He stood abruptly, grabbing his coat. I came here thinking you wanted to apologize for how you've been acting, for pulling away, for refusing to help us. But instead, you're doubling down on this ridiculous narrative where you're the victim and I'm some kind of abuser. I don't need this. Wait. My voice was sharp enough to stop him. Before you go, I need to say something. I need you to hear me. He stood by the door, his hand on the knob, his body language screaming his desire to leave, but he paused, giving me one last chance. I have given you everything, I said, my voice shaking but steady. My time, my money, my energy, my love. I raised you alone after your father died. I worked myself to exhaustion to give you opportunities I never had. I sacrificed relationships, happiness, my own future to make sure yours was secure. And somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as a person. I became a resource to you, something to extract from. You take my money and don't pay it back. You take my help and give nothing in return. You take my love and treat it like it's worthless. That's not fair, Mom. I appreciate everything you did. Appreciation isn't the same as respect, David. And you don't respect me. You don't respect my boundaries, my feelings, my worth as a human being. You hit me and you won't even acknowledge it. You won't apologize. You won't take responsibility. Instead, you're making me feel crazy for being hurt by it. I didn't hit you, he insisted, but his voice had lost its conviction. Yes, you did. And until you can admit that, until you can look me in the eye and take responsibility for your actions, I don't think we can have a relationship. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with finality. David's face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, something that might have been fear. Are you serious? You're going to throw away our entire relationship over this? You threw it away when you decided I wasn't worth treating with basic human decency. I'm just finally accepting what you've been showing me for years. Fine, fine. If that's how you want it, we're done. Don't call me. Don't expect anything from me. You want to be alone? Congratulations. You got your wish. He slammed the door on his way out, the sound echoing through my apartment. I stood in the middle of my living room, my heart racing, my hands shaking. Part of me wanted to run after him, to take it all back, to beg him to stay. But I didn't. I let him go. I let the relationship I had clung to so desperately dissolve, because holding on to it was killing me. I cried that night, deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere primal. I grieved the son I had lost, the relationship that had died long before I acknowledged its death, the future I had imagined where we would grow old together, where he would care for me the way I had cared for him. I grieved the mother I had been, the woman who gave and gave until there was nothing left, who measured her worth by how much she could sacrifice. But when the tears finally stopped, when the apartment grew quiet again except for the ever-present hum of the city outside, I felt something unexpected. Lightness. Like a weight I had been carrying for decades had finally been lifted. I had told my truth. I had set a boundary. I had chosen myself. And I was still here, still breathing, still standing. The weeks that followed were strange. I kept expecting David to call, to apologize, to try to reconcile. Instead, there was only silence. No calls, no texts. It was as though I had ceased to exist in his world the moment I stopped being useful. The rejection hurt, but it also clarified things. He had never valued me for who I was, only for what I could provide. I threw myself into building a life that didn't revolve around waiting for his approval or attention. I joined a book club at the library where I met other women my age who had their own stories of difficult family relationships. I volunteered more hours at the community garden, getting my hands dirty in the soil, watching things grow. I took a painting class at the senior center and discovered I had a talent for watercolors, for capturing the way light fell across buildings and trees. The painting class became my sanctuary. Every Thursday afternoon, I would sit in the bright room on the second floor of the senior center, surrounded by other students, most of them retirees like me who had finally found time to explore creativity they had suppressed for decades. Our instructor, Marcus, was a retired art teacher with infinite patience and an ability to see potential in even the most hesitant brushstrokes. "There are no mistakes in watercolor," he would say. "Only opportunities for discovery." I started with simple subjects, a bowl of fruit, a single flower in a vase. But gradually, I became braver. I painted the view from my window, the 7 train cutting through the morning fog. I painted memories, the kitchen in the apartment where David grew up, though I couldn't quite bring myself to include him in the image. I painted my feelings, abstract swirls of blue and gray that somehow captured the loneliness and liberation I was experiencing simultaneously. Marcus noticed my progress. "You have a good eye for light," he told me one afternoon, studying a painting I had done of Central Park in autumn. "The way you've captured the sun filtering through the leaves, it's quite beautiful." His praise made me cry. And I realized how starved I had been for recognition, for someone to see what I created and find value in it. I had spent so many years being invisible that even this small acknowledgement felt revolutionary. Mrs. Johnson and I became closer, developing the kind of friendship I had missed for years. We went to museums together, took walks in Central Park, had dinner at little restaurants neither of us would have tried alone. She showed me that connection didn't have to be exhausting, that relationships could be reciprocal and nourishing rather than draining. One December afternoon, about 6 weeks after my confrontation with David, something unexpected arrived in my mailbox. A letter, handwritten, from Brianna of all people. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it carefully, bracing myself for more cruelty. The letter was not what I expected. It was an apology, sort of, though it was wrapped in justifications and excuses. Brianna wrote that David had been struggling with stress at work, that his investment portfolio had taken some hits with recent market volatility, that they were dealing with financial pressure I didn't understand. She said he had been on edge, and that the incident at my apartment was out of character for him. What struck me most was the final paragraph. Brianna wrote that they had discovered I had been recording that day, and David was furious about it. He felt betrayed, violated, exposed. She was writing to ask, almost to demand, that I delete the video and never mention it to anyone. In exchange, she said they would be willing to smooth things over and include me in their lives again. I read the letter 3 times, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. There was no real acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no genuine apology for how I had been treated, just concern about the video, about potential consequences for David if anyone saw it. The offer to include me again was presented as a generous concession, as though my presence in their lives was a privilege they were graciously extending. I thought about the woman I had been 2 months ago, how desperately she would have seized this opportunity, how quickly she would have agreed to delete the video, to never speak of it, to sweep everything under the rug in exchange for the smallest scraps of inclusion. How grateful she would have been just to be allowed back into her son's life, no matter the cost to her dignity. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I sat down at my kitchen table with a pen and paper and wrote my own letter in response. I kept it brief and clear. I thanked Brianna for reaching out, but explained that I would not be deleting the video. It was my record of what happened, my proof when doubt crept in, my reminder of why I had to set boundaries. I wrote that I was open to reconciliation with David, but only if he was willing to truly acknowledge what he had done, to take responsibility without deflection or minimization, and to treat me with respect going forward. I ended the letter by saying that I hoped they would get their financial situation sorted out, but that my relationship with my son couldn't be contingent on my silence or my willingness to pretend I hadn't been hurt. I mailed it the next day and felt a sense of peace I hadn't expected. Christmas approached, a holiday I had always spent with David. This year, the prospect of spending it alone should have been devastating, but I found myself making other plans. Mrs. Johnson invited me to join her family's celebration, introducing me to her daughter and grandchildren who welcomed me warmly. The house was full of laughter and chaos, children running around, food being shared, genuine affection flowing freely. It was everything I had hoped my Christmases with David would be, and it was being offered to me by people who barely knew me, simply because they had room at their table and kindness in their hearts. On Christmas morning, I woke in Mrs. Johnson's guest room to the smell of coffee and cinnamon rolls. Downstairs, her grandchildren were opening presents, their excited squeals filling the house with joy. Mrs. Johnson handed me a small wrapped box, insisting I open it with everyone else. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a small charm in the shape of a garden trowel. "For all the beautiful work you do at the community garden," she said, hugging me, "and for being such a good friend this year." I cried, but they were good tears this time. Tears of gratitude, of belonging, of recognizing that family isn't always the people we're born to. Sometimes it's the people who choose us, who see our worth and reflect it back to us, who show up not because they have to, but because they want to. In the new year, I made another decision that would have terrified the old me. I had been living in my small apartment for over 20 years, and while I loved the neighborhood, the space had become heavy with memories, many of them painful. I started looking at other apartments, maybe something a bit smaller but brighter, in a different part of Queens, or perhaps even Manhattan if I could find something affordable. The search itself was empowering. I was making choices based on what I wanted, not what would be convenient for David's visits, or what would leave me with enough money to help him out when he called. I was prioritizing my own comfort, my own happiness, my own future. During this process, I also made an appointment to meet with a lawyer about estate planning. I had always assumed I would leave everything to David, my modest savings, my small life insurance policy, my belongings. But now I wasn't so sure. I wanted to understand my options, to make sure that whatever I left behind would go to people and causes that aligned with my values, not just to someone who happened to share my DNA. The lawyer, a kind woman in her 50s named Patricia, listened to my story without judgment. You have the right to distribute your assets however you choose, she said. And you can change your mind at any time. The important thing is that you're thinking about this intentionally, making decisions that feel right to you. I walked out of her office with a folder of information and a strange sense of power. These were my choices to make. My life, my resources, my legacy. I didn't owe anyone automatic access to any of it, not even my son. In late January, something I hadn't anticipated happened. David called, not asking for anything this time, not demanding or manipulating. His voice was small, uncertain. "Mom, can we talk?" I almost said no. I had built such a good life in the months since our confrontation. I was happy, genuinely happy, in a way I couldn't remember being in years. Letting him back in, even for a conversation, felt risky. But I also knew I would regret not hearing what he had to say. So I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop near my apartment. Neutral territory. He looked awful when he arrived. Thinner, exhausted, his expensive suit hanging a bit loose on his frame. We ordered coffee and sat at a corner table, the awkwardness between us palpable. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then David cleared his throat. "I saw what you wrote to Brianna," he began, "about needing me to acknowledge what I did." I waited, not filling the silence, not making it easier for him. "I've been thinking about that day a lot, about what happened, and about everything you said to me after." He paused, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup. "I want to tell you that you were right, about all of it." The admission hung in the air. I felt something in my chest loosen slightly, but I stayed quiet, needing him to continue. "I did hit you. I've been telling myself it was barely anything, that you were exaggerating, but I watched myself in that video and I was horrified. That's not who I want to be. That's not who I thought I was." "What changed?" I asked quietly. He let out a long breath. "Brianna left me. 2 weeks ago. She said I was becoming someone she didn't recognize, that I was angry all the time, that the financial stress was making me impossible to live with. She took most of the money from our joint accounts and moved in with her parents." Part of me felt vindicated. Part of me felt sad for him. Mostly, I felt cautious. "I'm sorry you're going through that, David. But I need to know, are you here because you genuinely recognize how you've treated me was wrong? Or are you here because you're alone now and you need someone?" His eyes filled with tears. "Both, probably. I am alone, and it's terrifying. But also, losing Brianna made me realize I've been losing you too. Slowly. For years. And that's my fault. I took you for granted. I treated you like an ATM and a therapist and a problem solver, but not like a person. Not like my mother who sacrificed everything for me." "Why did you do it?" The question I had wanted to ask for so long finally came out. "When did I stop mattering to you?" He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I don't think you ever stopped mattering. I think I just got so caught up in trying to be successful, trying to fit into Brianna's world, trying to prove I was good enough, that I lost sight of everything else. You were always there, always steady, always willing to help. I think I started to see that as a given rather than a gift. And when you weren't there anymore, when you set boundaries, I panicked. I felt like you were abandoning me, which is insane because I was the one who had abandoned you." We talked for over 2 hours that afternoon. David opened up about his marriage, about the pressure he had felt to keep up with Brianna's lifestyle, about the bad investments he had made trying to grow their wealth quickly, about the debt he had hidden from everyone. He talked about his father, about missing him, about how he had never properly grieved because I had been so strong, and he felt like he had to be strong too. "I was 7 when Dad died," he said, his voice breaking. "And you never cried. At least not in front of me. You were always so strong, so capable, handling everything. I thought that's what I was supposed to do too. Just keep moving forward, don't feel too much, Don't need too much from other people. He looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. But I did cry, Mom. I cried every night for months, into my pillow so you wouldn't hear me, because I thought if you saw me falling apart, it would make things harder for you. So I learned to hide my feelings, to push down my needs, to pretend I was fine when I wasn't. His words broke my heart. I had tried so hard to be strong for him, to shield him from my own grief and fear, and in doing so, I had inadvertently taught him that feelings were something to hide, that vulnerability was weakness. I did cry, I told him quietly. Every morning in the shower where you couldn't hear me, every night after you fell asleep, in the break room at work, in the bathroom at the grocery store, anywhere I could find privacy. I thought I was protecting you by not showing you my pain, but maybe I was just teaching you to hide yours. We sat in that coffee shop crying together, two people who had loved each other but had forgotten how to show it, who had been playing roles for so long that we had lost sight of who we really were underneath. It wasn't a resolution, wasn't a happy ending, but it was honest. And honesty, I was learning, was the only foundation worth building on. I shared my own pain, the years of feeling invisible and used, the loneliness of loving someone who didn't seem to love me back, the terror of setting boundaries, and the freedom that came after. I told him about Mrs. Johnson, about my painting class, about the life I had built without him. "I'm proud of you," he said at one point, and the word surprised me, "for standing up for yourself, for not letting me treat you like that anymore. I needed you to do that, even though I fought against it." "I needed to do it too," I replied, "for myself." Before we parted, David asked if we could try again, if I would be willing to rebuild our relationship. I told him the truth. I didn't know. I needed to see consistent change over time, needed to see that this wasn't just a temporary crisis response that would disappear once he got back on his feet. I needed him to earn back my trust through actions, not just words. "I understand," he said, "and I'm willing to work for it, however long it takes." Over the following months, David did something I never expected. He showed up, not with grand gestures or expensive gifts, but with consistency. He called every week, not asking for anything, just checking in. He sent cards for no reason. He apologized again and again, each time with more understanding of the depth of harm he had caused. He started therapy, working through his own issues around money, success, and self-worth. In March, he came to visit my new apartment. I had finally moved to a sunny one-bedroom in Astoria, with big windows and a small balcony where I could keep plants. He brought flowers and helped me hang pictures on the walls. We cooked dinner together, something we hadn't done since he was a teenager, and for the first time in years, being with him felt easy instead of draining. "This place is great, Mom," he said, looking around. "It feels like you." "It does, doesn't it?" I smiled, realizing how true that was. Everything in this space was chosen by me, for me, reflecting who I was becoming rather than who I had been. We ate on the balcony as the sun set, the city lights beginning to twinkle in the distance. David talked about his plans to downsize his lifestyle, to sell the brownstone and move somewhere more modest, to focus on rebuilding his savings in a more stable way. He talked about dating again, eventually, but being in no rush. He talked about wanting to get to know me better, to hear stories about my life beyond my role as his mother. "Tell me about you," he said. "What do you love? What makes you happy?" I realize I never really asked before. So I told him about my painting, about the watercolor I had just finished of Central Park in autumn. I told him about the book club and our heated debates about contemporary literature. I told him about Mrs. Johnson and her family, about how being included in their lives had shown me what healthy relationships could look like. I told him about the community garden and how satisfying it was to watch vegetables grow from seeds I had planted. He listened with genuine interest, asking questions, engaging with my life as though it mattered to him. It was such a simple thing, being seen and heard by your own child, but it felt revolutionary. "I missed so much," he said quietly. "All these years, I could have known you like this. I could have had a real relationship with you instead of just using you." "We can't change the past," I said, "but we can decide what comes next." That night, after David left, I sat on my balcony wrapped in a blanket looking out at the city. I thought about the journey I had taken, from that terrible afternoon when his hand struck my face to this moment of tentative reconciliation. I thought about all the versions of myself I had been. The devoted mother who gave everything. The broken woman who accepted crumbs. The angry woman who finally said enough. And now this woman, this person who had learned to value herself. The transformation hadn't been easy. There had been so many moments of doubt, so many times I almost gave in, almost accepted less than I deserved because being alone felt too scary. But I had pushed through, had learned that being alone wasn't the worst thing that could happen to me. Being treated badly while pretending everything was fine, that was worse. Losing myself in service to people who didn't appreciate it, that was worse. I didn't know if my relationship with David would fully heal. Maybe it would. Maybe it wouldn't. But I knew that either way, I would be okay. I had built a life that didn't depend on his presence or approval. I had found worth in myself rather than in what I could give to others. I had discovered that setting boundaries didn't make me selfish or cruel. It made me whole. Spring came, bringing with it cherry blossoms in the park and longer days. I celebrated my 72nd birthday, surrounded by my book club friends, Mrs. Johnson and her family, and yes, David too. He brought a cake he had baked himself, lopsided and imperfect, but made with care. We laughed about his lack of baking skills, and for a moment, I caught a glimpse of the boy he used to be, before life had hardened him, before he had lost his way. "Thank you for not giving up on me," he said as he was leaving, "even when I gave you every reason to." "Thank you for finally seeing me," I replied, "even if it took you a while." As summer approached, I made a decision I had been contemplating for months. I used some of my savings to book a trip to California. I had never been to the West Coast, had never really traveled anywhere because there was always something more important to spend money on, usually something David needed. But now, I was prioritizing experiences for myself. Mrs. Johnson decided to join me, and we spent a glorious 2 weeks exploring San Francisco, driving up the coast to see the redwoods, watching the sunset over the Pacific Ocean. I painted watercolors of the landscapes, capturing the way the light hit the waves, the towering trees, the colorful Victorian houses. I felt alive in a way I couldn't remember feeling, like the world was full of possibilities instead of obligations. David called while I was away, not because he needed anything, but because he wanted to hear about my trip. I told him about the sea lions at Pier 39, about the fog rolling in over the Golden Gate Bridge, about the little art gallery in Sausalito where I had left one of my paintings on consignment. His enthusiasm felt genuine, and I realized our relationship was slowly becoming what I had always hoped it could be: reciprocal, respectful, real. On my last night in California, I sat on the beach watching the sunset, my feet buried in the sand, the sound of waves creating a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat. I thought about the woman I had been a year ago, sitting in her small apartment in Queens, accepting a slap from her son because she was too afraid of loneliness to demand better. I thought about how far I had come, how much I had grown, how I had learned to love myself enough to walk away from relationships that diminished me. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. I raised my glass of wine in a silent toast to myself, to survival, to transformation, to the hard-won peace of knowing your own worth. Tomorrow I would fly home to New York, back to my sunny apartment and my growing circle of friends. back to my painting and my garden and my life that I had built from the ashes of everything that had burned down. But tonight, I simply sat and watched the ocean, feeling the vastness of it, the endless rolling waves, the power and beauty of something that had existed long before me and would continue long after I was gone. There was comfort in that perspective, in understanding that my pain and my healing were part of a larger story, part of the human experience of losing yourself and finding your way back. I thought about my mother, gone now for 15 years, and wondered if she had ever felt this way. Had she ever been treated poorly by people she loved? Had she ever had to make the choice between keeping the peace and keeping herself? I wished I could talk to her, tell her what I had learned, ask her what she had learned. But maybe this was the lesson, passed down through generations, that we teach each other through our struggles, that our liberation gives others permission to seek their own. When I returned home, I found an envelope waiting for me, forwarded from my old address. Inside was a check from David, repaying all the money I had loaned him over the years, every penny plus interest. There was a note attached in his handwriting. "I'm sorry it took me so long. Thank you for everything. I love you, Mom." I stood in my kitchen holding the check, tears streaming down my face. Not because of the money, though it would help, but because it represented something more important: acknowledgement. He saw what he had taken, and he was trying to make it right. It didn't erase the past, didn't undo the hurt, but it mattered. It was a step toward the kind of relationship I had always wanted with him. I deposited the check and used part of it to donate to the community garden, helping them expand their programs for other seniors in the neighborhood. I used another part to upgrade my painting supplies, investing in better quality materials for the art that had become such an important part of my life. The rest I saved, this time for myself, for my own future, not as a safety net for anyone else. As autumn arrived again, marking a full year since the incident that had changed everything, I organized a small gathering in my apartment. Mrs. Johnson and her family came, along with friends from my book club and painting class. David came too, and I watched him interact with all these people who had become important to me. I saw him listening to Mrs. Johnson's stories, complimenting paintings by my classmates, helping her grandchildren with a puzzle. At one point, he pulled me aside. "You have a beautiful life, Mom," he said. "I'm glad I get to be part of it now, instead of being the whole thing." His words captured something important. I had spent so long making him my entire world, deriving all my purpose and identity from being his mother. But now, my life was full in other ways. He was part of my world, an important part, but not the only part. And that balance felt healthy in a way nothing had before. Late that night, after everyone had gone, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea, the city quiet below me. I thought about sharing my story, about the possibility that someone else might be living through what I had lived through, might be accepting treatment they shouldn't accept because they're afraid of being alone. I wanted them to know that the fear is real, but the freedom on the other side is worth it. That you can love people and still set boundaries. That you can be a good mother, a good person, without sacrificing yourself completely. I pulled out my laptop and began to write, the words flowing from a place of hard-won wisdom. I wrote about the slap, about the years of exploitation, about the painful journey to self-worth. I wrote about the video I still had, the proof that I wasn't crazy, that my hurt was real. I wrote about the transformation, the rebuilding, the unexpected joy of discovering myself at 72 years old. And as I wrote, I realized this was part of my healing too. Sharing the story, owning it, refusing to be ashamed of what had happened to me or how I had responded. This was my truth, and it deserved to be told. So I ask you now, have you lived something like this? Have you loved someone who took more than they gave, who made you feel small, who expected your unconditional love without offering respect in return? Have you stayed in relationships that hurt you because being alone seemed worse? Or do you know someone who is living this right now, someone who needs permission to choose themselves? If this story touched you, please share it in the comments below. Your story matters. Your pain matters. Your healing matters. And if you found value in hearing my journey, I would be deeply grateful if you would like this video and subscribe to the channel. Not for me, but for the next person who needs to hear that they deserve better, that they can survive the fear of loneliness, that there is life and joy and freedom waiting on the other side of that first brave boundary. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for witnessing my pain and my transformation. And most of all, thank you for considering your own worth, your own boundaries, your own right to be treated with love and respect by the people you love. You deserve that. We all deserve that. And it's never too late to start demanding it.